Have you ever heard of a place called the Hill of Evil Counsel in Jerusalem? No? Well, it's a very interesting place and has a dark history connected to the nation of Israel. First, the Jewish tradition says that it is on this hill that Absalom, David's son, received an advice to overthrow his father. Of course, this was a very evil advice, not only to overthrow his father, but also to sleep with all of David's concubines. But that's not all. The things got even worse in the time of Solomon, because during his reign, he allowed for the creation of shrines to the foreign gods of Chemosh and Molech. Molech was a god where children were sacrificed. So on this mountain, there were some really evil things going on. Now, the sacrifice of children is the greatest abomination you can do, and Israel was severely punished by the God of Israel for it. Another tradition, possibly from the Byzantine period, says that on the Hill of Evil Counsel, the house of the high priest was located, where the priests and elders of Israel plotted against Jesus. But the location of the Hill of Evil Counsel is actually debatable. So let's talk about it. So here you can see my 3D model of the topography of Jerusalem with the model of the city of David. So we are looking right now from south to north, and we're looking at the city of David. We have the place where the temple will stand. This model is not ready yet, but I just put it a simple model so that you can orientate where the temple was located on Mount Moriah. And then we have the Mount of Olives and the Western Hill, which is sometimes called the Hill of Zion, the Zion Mountain. So where is the Hill of Evil Counsel on this model? Well, the proposed location, one of the proposed location, is this hill over here. And today this hill is better known as Abu Tor. But to present to you the second option, I will have to pull up the modern model of Jerusalem. So let's do that. So once again, you can see the city of David, but now you can see the modern Jerusalem and its topography. So once again, for the sake of orientation, you can see the Temple Mount, the city of David, Mount of Olives, and the Western Hill. And of course, we can see the neighborhood of Abu Tor, which is the first proposed location for the Hill of Evil Counsel. But to see the second candidate for the Hill of Evil Counsel, we have to zoom out even further. And then we can see the significance of this hill. And the significance is really the geography. From that point, we have an excellent view on everything important in Jerusalem. So if we draw a straight line from that point, we are even higher than the Temple Mount. That's why strategically, this seems to be a very important spot for observation. And in ancient times, you can imagine it would be valued to be here because you can observe the city of David, the Temple Mount, and all of important places in Jerusalem. Anyway, I have a short video from this hilltop that I will share with you right now. It is just an introduction to a longer video, which you will be able to see at the end of this episode. So enjoy the view. Shalom, friends. Today I have another wonderful view for you. We are in Jerusalem, on the south side of Jerusalem, in the direction of Hebron. And as you see in front of us, we have a beautiful panorama of Jerusalem. So again, for orientation, I will show you where exactly I was standing in this video you just saw. So this is the spot, and it's part of the Tayelet promenade, which is a nice spot to walk around in Jerusalem today. So let's look what we have in this neighborhood. So I'm zooming right now, and here you can see the square. This is where I was recording the video. But the place that really interests us is just a couple dozen meters away from this viewpoint, and it's this territory over here. You can see like a half a Star of a David here, and I'll get back why this place is very important. So I'll just zoom out a little bit, and I want to show you something interesting here. So, you know, in Google, you can turn on the street view. So you can see like the blue lines, and it shows you where you can zoom in to see the streets, like in photo mode. So you can see all those blue lines, but in this area, which interests us, there's hardly any places we can zoom in. There are just some spots we can zoom in, and that's basically it. So we can look around, but we can't really walk here. It's very limited. And it's all around this place that interests us here. So why is that? Well, we're going to talk about it, but it's very intriguing, right? So, first of all, before we move on, I want to mention a few things. So, what interesting is here is this neighborhood Talpiot Mizrach, so the east of Talpiot. And it refers to this neighborhood here, which is Talpiot proper. And the word Talpiot means the mountain of fortress. And I'll talk why this is important in a moment. But first, one more thing I want to say. So if we zoom in a little bit more over here, you will see that the US Embassy in Israel is located now also in this location. So an interesting spot, right, on this mountain that we have the Embassy of the United States. And now, guys, a very important thing here. If we look here, you will see like a white line over here. It's dashed line. And if we zoom in, you will see the name Armistice Line of 1949. Okay, so you see this line, and you'll see that this line goes through this neighborhood of East Talpiot. So this is East Talpiot, and right next to it is an Arab neighborhood over here. So you have an Arab neighborhood right next to this Jewish neighborhood of East Talpiot. So what is this line all about? Well, let's talk about it. So before we get into details, I have to talk a little bit about the context. So this is the map in 1948 of Israel and its neighbors. So if you remember, right after Ben-Gurion announced the Declaration of Independence, this tiny infant nation of Israel was attacked by all of its neighbors. And the idea basically was to push all the Jewish people into the Mediterranean Sea. But this war that was started by the Arab nations that also just came into existence didn't produce results that the Arab nations hoped for. Israel was able to defend itself, and the map you see now are the territories controlled by each country. Now, for this episode, we are most interested in this territory over here. This territory is called Judea and Samaria. Now, sometimes people, by mistake, call it the West Bank. Why? Because it's west of Jordan. And Jordan started controlling this territory after the War of Independence. But it's a very artificial name because Judea and Samaria functioned this name for thousands of years, while the people of Jordan never had a historical heritage to those territories. So here you can see the territories that the Kingdom of Israel controlled around 1000 BC. And of course, this information we can find in the Bible, but there are plenty of archaeological findings that point to this reality. And what is interesting, this map, if you compare it to today's reality, we see that not only Israel at that time controlled the territories of Judea and Samaria, but also they controlled the territories east of Judea and Samaria, which today is parts of today's Jordan and Syria. And that's because if you read the Bible, you know that those territories were given to the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and East Manasseh. And if we go back to our map from 1948, do you know when Jordan received its independence and became a country? Well, it happened in 1946, so 2 years before Israel announced its independence. So here you have a map of the world in 1914, so just before World War I. So I'm showing this map to point out how many border changes we had in the 20th century. Before World War I, the most influential powers were the British Empire, France, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and of course the United States, although the involvement of the United States in World War I was minimal compared to other countries. And of course we could talk a lot about World War I and its significance, but for now I would like us to focus on the territories that are circled in red right now. So the territories we know today as the Near East. But before we will move on, I just want to point out one more thing. So you have Egypt marked here on this map, and that's because Egypt at that time in 1914 was still under the British protectorate. And the British really didn't move out of Egypt for a really long time. Although Egypt got its independence in 1922, the British left only in the 50s. And that's because the British were shareholders of the Suez Canal built by the French in Egypt. Needless to say, the Brits were very interested in controlling this trade route for economic reasons. Okay, but let's zoom in now to the territories that actually interest us. So the key player in this region before World War I was, of course, the Ottoman Empire. So this is 1914, okay? And now look at this territory already in 1920. So what we have here is basically the Ottoman Empire chopped into pieces. Ottoman Empire was the losing side of World War I, and it had to face consequences. What we have of this vast empire that ruled the Near East and Africa for several centuries is this small territory of the Republic of Turkey now. And the rest is given to the winners. But what I would like you to see on this map is that the only country we have in the Near East today is Egypt. The rest are countries that don't exist today or countries that were controlled by other powers. And even Egypt, if you remember, was under a heavy influence of the British until 1956. 1956 is the date that the British troops finally left the Suez Canal area. So now back to our main map, and after this, I promise we'll go back to the Hill of Evil Counsel. But I think you need to know the background before we talk about it. So in 1949, a deal was reached, negotiated by the United Nations for a ceasefire between Israel and the Arab nations. What happened is that a green line, and I really mean green because a green marker was used to draw up the borders between Israel and the Arab nations, the territories that were controlled by Israel and the territories that the Arab nations were supposed to control. And as you can see, a green line was drawn around Judea and Samaria. The most important city that was affected by this was, of course, Jerusalem, which is located right here. But there are many other cities that the Jewish people were cut off from. And needless to say, those cities were very, very important for the Jewish heritage, such as Hebron, Bethlehem, Bethel, Shiloh, Shechem, Jericho. Those are just a few that are worth mentioning and that go back thousands of years and connect to the state of Israel. But in this episode, let's focus on Jerusalem. So you see that kind of like a small dent in the line over here? This is the part we're gonna focus on because this is where the Hill of Evil Counsel is located. So here is a much detailed map of Jerusalem. And again, you can see here this dent that we saw on the other map. And you can also see the East Talpiot right next to the dent. This is the area we were talking about at the beginning of the video where the Hill of Evil Counsel is located. And you can also see where the old city is located. Now, important to remember is that the green line refers to the year 1949. This is when the agreement was reached and the green line was drawn. And what it basically did, this green line, is divide Jerusalem into West and East. West was controlled by the Jewish people and East was controlled by the Arab nations. And most importantly, the old city, so the Temple Mount, the City of David, the Western Wall, all the important sites connected to the Jewish history were off limits for the Jewish people. That was a very difficult and challenging period for the Jewish people because even in the Ottoman era, the Jewish people had more freedom and more access to the religious sites that are connected with the nation of Israel for thousands of years. But then something incredible has happened. In 1967, the Jewish people regained control of Jerusalem after 1,000 years of exile. As you saw, this was a very joyful day for the Jewish people and a day when Jerusalem was reunited. So, before I will move on to the Hill of Evil Counsel and the United Nations involvement in that area, I would like us to remember the words of the prophet Joel. So let's listen.
For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people.
So, a valley is mentioned here, the valley of Jehoshaphat. There are three important valleys around the historical Jerusalem: the Tyropian Valley, the Hinnom Valley, and the Kidron Valley. Traditionally, the valley of Jehoshaphat that Prophet Joel mentions is the Kidron Valley. And just for orientation, you can also see one of the proposed locations of the Hill of Evil Counsel. This is this hill over here. Now, what is interesting is that we read in this passage of Joel that God will bring down the nations to the valley and he will judge them there. And why will he judge them? Because they have divided his nation, they have divided his land. So here again is another view on the Kidron Valley where the nations will be judged, and a proposed location of the Hill of Evil Counsel. But there is another hill which we talked about in the beginning of the video, which has a much better view of Jerusalem and is also considered to be the Hill of Evil Counsel. This hill is this one over here. The reason that, in my opinion, this is a better candidate for the Hill of Evil Counsel is that the nations are already gathered there. So let's have a look. So here again is the structure on the Hill of Evil Counsel we talked about at the beginning of the video. So what is this structure? Well, this is the so-called UNTSO, which stands for the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization. But the main building is better known as the Government House, which was constructed by the British. Here is an old photo of the government building, and just for orientation, the Temple Mount would be that way, which is north. When the British mandate ended and the British left Israel, then this building was given to the Red Cross. Speaking of the Red Cross, I'm sorry, but I just have to mention this. So the Red Cross uses right now three symbols. The first one is, of course, the Red Cross. The second one is the Red Crescent. And the third one is like a red crystal or something. The Red Crescent was introduced really by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire didn't want to use the cross, so they were using the Red Crescent. And eventually the Red Crescent was officially recognized also by the Red Cross. Now, for Israel, it is problematic also to use the cross because the cross is often recognized as a symbol of the Crusades, and the crescent, of course, I don't have to talk about this. This is the long history of conflicts between Jews and Arabs. But the Jews do have a symbol that they are happy to use, which is the Star of David. But guess what? The Red Cross is not feeling comfortable to use the Star of David because it may offend the Muslims. And so it is okay to use the Red Crescent in Israel, which of course may be offensive to some of the Jewish people, but it's not okay to recognize the Star of David, a Jewish symbol, as officially working with the Red Cross. And so this red crystal or something is introduced to show neutrality. Of course, this is just one of many, many reasons why Israelis don't really like the Red Cross, because it's corrupt. It is one-sided and it is being funded by a lot of Arab money. Anyways, let's continue. So then the Red Cross gave this building to the United Nations. Can you imagine this? I mean, who gave the United Nations the right to have this building? I mean, they didn't buy it, they didn't pay for it. Why did they receive this building for free? That's the question. So we talked about the Hill of Evil Counsel. Now let's talk about the Hill of Evil Council. So the Council of the League of Nations confirmed the British mandate in 1922. And this territory was actually divided in two. So this is actually the original two-state solution for the British mandate, right? You have the territory that we know today as Israel and an Arab part, which today is Jordan. So, as I mentioned, when Israel announced its independence, it was attacked from all sides. The war ended, as we mentioned, with a ceasefire, and of course, the division of the land, drawing borders with a green pencil. And the area that was most affected was, of course, Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. Anyway, today this building on the Hill of Evil Council also has an office for a UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. What I also need to mention here is that the United Nations is one of 4 members of the Middle East Quartet. The other 3 are the Russian Federation, the United States, and the European Union. So we do have quite an interesting representation on this hill. All the nations, the representatives, are on this hill. And in the context of the prophecy in Joel, this is very interesting, because the United Nations were directly involved in dividing God's land. Before I will where Jerusalem started, in front of us, under the dome of the rock, the Temple Mount. Below, we see the city of David and the Kidron Valley. This is where the history of Jerusalem began. This is where we had first the Jebusite city. This is even before that we had Salem that Abraham visited. And later on, King David made this little hill the capital of the 12 tribes of Israel. History did move on, and his son Solomon was the one that built the temple above. He built the temple to honor God, to have a permanent place where God's glory would reside among his people. Today, of course, in this place, we have the ancient walls from Herod's time. We have the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim shrine. But in Herod's time, there was a beautiful building of the Second Temple in that location. When Jesus came to Jerusalem, he was coming from the east, behind this mountain you see in front of you, Mount of Olives. He was coming from death to life because he was coming from the desert, and behind this mountain there is the Judean desert where there is no life. And he saw Jerusalem as he was coming from the area of Jericho. He stopped in Bethphage, and then he saw this eternal city that God has loved so much. Today, on the Mount of Olives, we have the cemetery, one of the biggest and most ancient cemeteries in the world, where Jewish people for centuries wanted to be buried there, as they believe the words of Zechariah. And one day they will be resurrected, when the Messiah will step down on the Mount of Olives. They will be the first ones that will have the privilege to see him, and together with the king and ruler of the world, they will enter the holy city. This is the hope of Israel today. This is the hope of Jerusalem today. If we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we are praying for that, for the Messiah to come back. Only he offers eternal shalom that will bring hope, that will erase the confusion and save his chosen people, Israel. Today, this is also the hope of many Christians, that believe that Jesus will step down on this mountain, and he will enter Jerusalem. In a time of war, in a time of conflicts, Jewish people are looking up. Christians are looking up, awaiting salvation and peace. May this come soon. Shalom.
Folks, you don't understand what this is going to do to Islam. The majority of Muslims don't know this, and they'll be shocked to hear this, and they'll say you're lying. A leading Islamic scholar, Fred McGraw-Donner, notice what he says. At the center of the town was a shrine called the Kaaba, a large cubical building with a sacred black stone affixed in one corner. That was the sanctuary to the pagan god Hubal. What are some of the pagan practices that Muhammad adopted? This is Karen Armstrong. They would kiss the black stone embedded in the wall of the Kaaba, which was probably a meteorite that had once hurled to the ground. Oh, so wait, the pagans before Muhammad used to kiss the black stone and Muhammad adopted it? Now we know why the pagans did it. Why is Muhammad doing it? Then she says in that same source, officially the shrine was dedicated to Hubal, an Nabatean deity, and there was 360 idols arranged around the Kaaba, probably representing the days of the year. Karen Armstrong, you are not hostile to Islam. You're very friendly to Islam, and you bend over backwards to appease Muslims. And Muslims even invite you to lecture in their meetings, and they praise your books. And you admit that the shrine was officially dedicated to Hubal? Then who is Allah? If the Kaaba is the shrine of Allah, but it's the shrine of Hubal, and you can't have a shrine for more than one God, the necessary logical inference and conclusion, Allah was the name of Hubal, Hubal was the name of Allah. How do you get around it? That's the mastermind of Satan. Allah was the name for Hubal. Hubal is Baal. But in order to mislead and deceive people, from realizing that they're worshiping the god Baal, he raised up Muhammad, the son of Satan, this Antichrist, and got Muhammad to disconnect, disassociate Allah from Hubal, so that the connection between Hubal and Allah was lost, so that you wouldn't see that Allah was simply Baal, in order to then deceive people into Baal worship, but disguising it as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Islam is nothing more than revamped Baal worship, and Baal was the chief competitor to Jehovah, and he's still the chief competitor to Jehovah under the guise of Islam. And even here, F.E. Peters, in his book, Hajj, this Muslim historian says, Amr ibn Luhay brought with him to Mecca an idol called Hubal from the land of Hit in Mesopotamia. Hubal was one of the Quraysh's greatest idols, so he set it up at the well inside the Kaaba and ordered the people to worship it. Thus, a man coming back from a journey would visit it and circumambulate the house before going to his family and would shave his hair before it. All of which Muslims do. Circumambulate the Kaaba and shave their heads. Here, the source is saying the pagans were doing that before Muhammad. Now, let me read Ibn Kathir. Are you ready now for this story? The biography of Muhammad, the Prophet, by Ibn Kathir. Volume 1, pages 125, 126. Ibn Ishaq stated, it is claimed that when Abdul Muttalib received such opposition from Quraysh over the digging of Zamzam, he vowed that if 10 sons were born to him, who grew up and protected him, he would sacrifice one of them for the God at the Kaaba. So notice his vow. If I have 10 sons, I will sacrifice one of them for God at Kaaba. Do you remember what the person said earlier? Oh yeah, but Baal demanded human sacrifice. Did you just catch it? Abdul Muttalib promised that if Allah gave him 10 sons, he would sacrifice one of his sons, a human sacrifice to Allah. Baal demanded human sacrifice. Allah demands human sacrifice. Let's see who's going to see this. Eventually, he had 10 sons grown up whom he knew would give him protection. Their names were Al-Harith, Al-Zubair, Hajl, Dirar, Al-Muqawwim, Abu Lahib, Al-Abbas, Hamza, Abu Talib, and Abdullah. He assembled them and told them of his vow and asked them to honor his pledge to God Almighty, Allah Azwajal, and all glorious is He. This is, in Arabic, it's Allah. God in English, but Arabic, Allah. So he vowed to Allah. Okay. They obeyed and asked him what he wanted them to do. He asked each of them to take an arrow, write his name on it, and return to him. Now watch this. Remember, he's going to go to Allah and sacrifice. Allah. They did so and went with him inside the Kaaba to the site of their god Hubal, where there was the well in which offerings to the Kaaba would be placed. There, near Hubal, were 7 arrows which they would use for divining a judgment over some matter of consequence, a question of blood money, kinship, or the like. They would come to Hubal to seek a resolution, accepting whatever they were ordered to do or to refrain from. Guys, can you help me understand? If you made the vow to Allah, why are you going to the idol Hubal? And why did Ibn Kathir say that's your God? The God of Muhammad's family, the God of his grandfather, and his father was Hubal. It goes on to say that the lot fell on Abdullah, Muhammad's father. So Hubal wanted Abdullah to be killed. But then the Quraysh said, no, don't kill him. Make a deal with your God to see if he'll take camels in place. Now watch here. They left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajjah. So they went to a witch to ask the witch, how can we appease Allah? How can I appease Allah so I don't kill Abdullah? Why would you go to a witch, a soothsayer, to tell you how to appease Allah? Are you catching this? I don't know if it's sinking in. What kind of God is Allah that would allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a soothsayer, a witch, a kahina, one who contacts spirits, to tell him how to appease Allah? And this is Ibn Kathir, one of the greatest Muslim scholars, saying this. So they left for Medina, where they found the diviner whose name was Sajjah, as Yunus bin Buqayya reported from Ibn Ishaq, that was at Khaybar. They rode off again and went to her and sought her advice. Abdul Muttalib telling her of the whole problem regarding him and his son. She told him, leave me today until my attendant spirit comes and I can ask him. Wow. So not only do you go to a witch, a soothsayer, she says, wait, my spirit will show up. In other words, a demon, a Satan. And that demon and Satan will tell you how to ransom your son Abdullah. And Allah is going to accept it. Allah is going to accept it, folks. Allah is going to allow Abdul Muttalib to go to a witch, a soothsayer, and allow an evil spirit, a demon, a spirit, to tell her how to appease Allah, and Allah is going to be okay with it. Now, what would the true God, Jehovah, Yahweh do? If an Israelite went looking for a witch and took the advice of the spirit that inspired that witch to appease Jehovah, what would God do, the true God do? Okay, now watch, let's keep going. They left her and Abdul Muttalib prayed to Allah. So he's praying to Allah. Next day, they went back to her and she informed them that she had a message. How much is the blood money you prescribe? She asked, 10 camels. Okay, and then they says, okay, go back and present your man as an offering and do the same with 10 camels. Then cast arrows to decide between him and them. If the dividing arrows point to him, then add to the number of camels until your God is satisfied. Keep doing this deviating of arrows until it points to the camels, not your son. Okay? And once it points to the camels, then you know that's how many camels you sacrifice to ransom your son Abdullah from being murdered. If it points to the camels, then sacrifice them in his place. That way you will please your God and save your man. So they went back to Mecca. When they had agreed to do so, as she had said, Abdul Muttalib said prayers to God, Allah. Then they offered up Abdullah and the 10 camels as sacrifice and cast the arrow. At that point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal praying to Allah, it's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. Wait, earlier it says their God was Hubal, and it says as he's praying to Allah, he's before the statue Hubal. At this point, the men of Quraysh told Abdul Muttalib, who was standing near Hubal praying to Allah. Arabic is Allah, a God. It's all over. Your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. But wait, who's his God? Is it Allah or Hubal? Because earlier Ibn Kathir told us this. They did so and went with them inside the Kaaba to the side of their God Hubal. Hold on. Abdul Muttalib prays to Allah by standing in front of the idol Hubal. Hubal is said to be his God and the God of his family. But then the Quraysh said, it's all over, your God is pleased, O Abdul Muttalib. So I'm really confused. If his God is Hubal and he's praying to Allah, but he's shuffling arrows to the statue Hubal, and he's before the statue of Hubal praying to Allah, are you trying to convince me that Hubal is not Allah, Allah is not Hubal? Why does Allah accept Abdul Muttalib going to a soothsayer witch? And why does Allah accept a demon telling that witch soothsayer how to appease Allah? And why is Abdul Muttalib going before the statue of Hubal and shuffling arrows and praying to Allah at the statue of Hubal? And if Allah is his God, why did Ibn Kathir say Hubal is his God? What's going on here? What's the conclusion? Who is Allah truly? He is Baal. And Baal is another name of Satan. What more proof do you guys need from the Muslim sources, when you combine them together, that Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan through his man Muhammad in order to entice the people of God today away from the worship of Jehovah, like Baal did during the Old Testament period? How many of you are overwhelmed and shocked by the evidence? And how many of you are now convinced Islam is nothing more than Baal worship repackaged by Satan? I'm not saying Muslims knowingly worship the false god Baal. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the Hebrew scriptures, you'll note that the main competitor for the worship and allegiance of the Israelites was the false god Baal. All throughout the Old Testament, you'll find God chastening, disciplining, rebuking, punishing, even exiling his people for their habitual habit of turning to the false god Baal, B-A-A-L, right? The name Baal also pops up in the New Testament under the name Beelzebub. If you read Mark 3, for instance, 22 all the way 30, the Jews accused Jesus of casting out demons by Beelzebub, the prince of demons. Baal, that's the word Baal, Zebul means Lord of the flies, Lord of the house. But the chief god that Satan used to get Israel to worship something or someone other than Jehovah, was Baal. In fact, Baal is simply Satan's disguise. Because if you go with what the Jews said in Mark 3, 22 to 30, if you go with the Jews, Beelzebub, Lord of the flies or Lord of the house, is the prince of demons. But the prince of demons would be Satan. So here, if the Jews are right, and Jesus didn't correct them, he didn't correct them saying, no, you're wrong, Beelzebub is not the prince of demons, the ruler of demons. That means Beelzebub, Baal, is simply another name of Satan. Because there's only one ruler of demons, Satan. He rules the kingdom of darkness. All evil spirits are subject to him. So if Beelzebub or Beelzebul is the ruler of demons, then that means that's another name for Satan. Now, if that's true, and the Bible indicates that's the case, Baal is simply Satan disguising himself as a god to lead people away from the worship of the true God. If that's true, Allah is simply another name for Baal, and Islam is simply another form of Baal worship, then that actually further confirms Islam is the religion of the devil. It's Satan's religion that Satan inspired through Muhammad to be the competitor against Judeo-Christianity, Judaism and Christianity. And that would make sense, right? Because all throughout Old Testament history, the chief competitor to Yahweh, Yahovah, was Baal. Right now, as we speak, the chief competitor, the chief religion competing for the devotion of the hearts and minds of not just the world, but of Jews and Christians, is Islam. So it's like history repeating itself. As Solomon said in the book of Ecclesiastes, nothing new under the sun. The same lie, the same deceit, the same trickery being promoted throughout the ages, but under different disguises, repackaged. It's the same deceit, but repackaged, right? So just like during the Old Testament period, Baal was the chief antagonists of Yahovah, vying for the affection of the Jews, the Israelites. Now you have Baal again competing for the affections of believers, but under the guise of Islam, under the name of Allah. You understand where I'm going with this? You understand why it's important to understand? Is Islam simply the religion of Baal, a form of Baal worship? So make sure you save the links, okay? Okay, now, let me now qualify what I'm saying. There's a caveat. That doesn't mean the Muslims knowingly worship Baal. Thank the Triune God for that. Father, Son, Spirit, thank the Lord Jesus. That doesn't mean Muslims know they're worshiping Baal. That's the deception. That's the deceit. Just like when the Israelites worship Baal, they didn't think they were worshiping Satan. Exactly, Winter King. Alat would simply be the Arabicized name for Ishtar, Astarte, Ishtar, Esther. Thank you, 100%. Okay, just like, follow with me. And Adrian Crescendi, what do you think jihad is? Don't insult me and don't let me block you. What do you think jihad is if it's not human sacrifice for Allah? Are you serious? One of the chief pillars in spreading Islam is jihad, human sacrifice, killing the infidels. That's not human sacrifice. Just like the Israelites did not think they were worshiping Satan when they worshiped Baal. Did they think they were worshiping Satan? Do you think the Israelites thought they were worshiping demons when they worshiped Baal, or they worshiped Astarte, Eshtar, or they worshiped Eel's consort Asherah? Do you think they thought that they were worshiping Satan and demons, evil spirits? Even though the Israelites did not think they were worshiping demons, Satan and demons, when they worshiped the gods and goddesses of the nations, Baal. In some places, Baal was a chief god. In other places, they knew he was a son of Eel. But still, he became the patron deity of many people. And I trust the Holy Spirit to guide me to address this issue correctly. They still were worshiping demons nonetheless. Deuteronomy 32, verses 16 to 17. Talking about the Israelites, they provoked him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations, provoked him to anger. They sacrificed unto devils, not to God, to gods whom they knew not, to new gods that came newly up, whom your fathers fear not. Did you catch it? The Israelites were sacrificing to devils, to demons, though that's not what they thought they were doing. You know me there? Similarly, Muslims don't think they're worshiping Baal. They think they're worshiping the true God of Abraham, and that's the deceit of Satan. Satan doesn't care whether you know you're worshiping him or not. In fact, he doesn't care whether you acknowledge he exists or not. He doesn't even care if you're an atheist. He just doesn't want you to know the true God and the true gospel, because that's the only way you can escape him and overcome him, right? So here are the three facts I want to establish. Facts that either the sources themselves come out and say, or facts that are derived from what these sources are saying, what they call the natural inference, the necessary inference, the conclusion of what they're saying. Okay, here are the three facts. And this is all in my articles. Fact number one, Hubal. Hubal was the chief deity, the chief god of Mecca and of the shrine, the Kaaba. That's the first fact. Fact number two, Hubal was actually Baal. Hubal, and the Muslim sources will testify, was actually the Arabic name for Baal. Some people believe Hubal either comes from Hubal, he is Baal, two Arabic words, or it is an Arabicized corruption of the Hebrew words Ha-Baal, the Baal. Okay, let me spell it out. Some people will tell you that Hubal is either Arabic for who, he, Baal, is Baal, or it's the Arabic corruption of Ha-Baal. The two Hebrew words Ha-Baal means the Baal. The third fact that obviously the sources don't come out and say it. The sources don't come out. Do you want to get blocked, brother? Make my day. The third fact, the sources don't come out and say it, but that's the logical, necessary inference, okay? Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. If you actually read, quote unquote, between the lines, you're going to see Hubal was Allah, Allah was Hubal. I wanted to give you a little background on the pagan religion in Mecca. Mecca, Medina, that's Arabia. Mecca, according to the Muslim sources, is the place where Muhammad was born. He belonged to the Quraysh tribe. The Quraysh tribe, which was an Arab tribe that lived in Mecca. And according to the Muslim sources, the Meccans were into astral worship. Astral worship. Now explain what astral worship means. Like other ancient civilizations, they associated the planets and the sun and moon with their gods and goddesses. And that link I gave you, I'm quoting the late Abdullah Yusuf Ali in his translation of the Quran, which I quote. He admits that the Arabs before Muhammad and during the time Muhammad were into astral worship, where they worshiped the sun and moon and 5 planets because they thought there were only 5 planets. Now let's do the math. Sun, moon, 5 planets, that's 7, right? Follow with me, that's 7, right? Sun and moon and 5 planets, that's 7. Now, in many cultures, the sun was the male deity and the moon was the female deity. The sun was the male deity and the moon was the female consort, the female deity. Not in Arabia. In Arabia, the moon was the male deity and the sun was the female deity. And the sun was the consort, the wife of the moon. Are you with me there? Let me read what he says. This is a Muslim. Now, he's passed away, but he admits this. To revert to the worship of the heavenly bodies, okay? A few individual stars did attract the worshippers' attention, e.g. Sirius. First, last, and Protestant, text me if I'm buffering, because I can't see, because I got to read. I have my phone here, God willing. So the Arabs worship Sirius, the dog star, the brightest fixed star in the heavens with a blush tinge in its light. It is probably Sirius that is referred to as the fixed star in the parable of Abraham. With regard to the fixed stars and their myriads, the astronomers turn their fancy to devising groups or constellations. Now, here's where it's going to get relevant, okay? But the moving stars are planets, each with a motion and therefore will or influence of its own, right? As they knew and understood them, they were 7 in number. That's what they thought, 7. And now he tells you what the 7 are. Viz, 1 and 2, the moon and the sun. So count. The 2 objects which most closely and indubitably, my lisp, influence the tides, the temperatures, and the life in our planet. 3 and 4, the 2 inner planets, Mercury and Venus. So that's 4 so far, Mercury and Venus, which are morning and evening stars and never travel far from the sun. 5, 6, and 7, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the outer planets whose elongation from the sun on the ecliptic can be as wide as possible. The number 7 itself is a mystical number, as explained in note 5526. Okay, now, notice what he's going to say. It would be noticed that the sun and the moon and the 5 planets, God identified, these 7 planets in total, sun and moon and the 5 planets, they got identified, associated with, each with a living deity, god or goddess, with characteristics and qualities of its own. Now, before I read the rest of the part, did you catch what he just said? This is a Muslim whose Quran translation was widely circulated and distributed in the 20th century. Okay, did you see what he just said? The Arabs in Mecca, in Arabia, but in Mecca, worship the sun and moon and 5 planets as 7 gods and goddesses. 7, right? You're going to see the relevance in a minute. You're going to see the relevance in a minute. And I hope I don't put you to sleep here, okay? I want you to listen. It's the relevance. Now, let me read the rest of it. Let me skip, and let me get to the relevant part. He goes, and the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, the Arabic word for the moon, qamar, is of the masculine gender. And on the other hand, the Arabic word for the sun, shams, is of the feminine gender. The pagan Arabs evidently looked upon the sun as a goddess and the moon as a god. So the Arabs in Mecca, Arabia in general, but Mecca specific because that's where Muhammad was born. They viewed the moon as the male god and the sun as the female god, the goddess. That's going to be important. Okay, so basically, I don't need to read the rest of it, but you can read it on your own leisure. Okay, folks, let me bring out the implication. The sources teach that the Kaaba in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, was a shrine that housed 360 idols. This is in the Muslim sources. It's not non-Muslim sources. 360 idols, okay, which Muhammad eventually destroyed. Okay. The Muslim sources also admit these are all documented in the articles I gave you. So you need to read these articles so you can have the sources to use to your Muslim friends. Well, so where are you getting this from? Here, I got it from Abu Yusuf Ali. The pagans before Muhammad would perform what they call the rites of pilgrimage, right? Hajj and Umrah, meaning they would come to the Kaaba, and those who lived there didn't need to travel. The Kaaba, that cube building that's been rebuilt on more than one occasion in Mecca, and the pagans would run around it 7 times. 7 times. Something Muslims do to this day. Muslims adopted these practices from the pagans. Muslims, like the pagans before them, right, would run 7 times. Okay? And then there are 2 hills in Mecca called Safa and Marwa. And they'd run between these hills 7 times. 7 times. And the Muslim sources say that at one time there were 2 idols on both hills. There was an idol here and an idol there, and they'd run 7 times. Now, folks, can I ask you a question? Why did the pagans run 7 times between the 2 hills, Safa and Marwa, and run around the Kaaba 7 times, practices which Islam adopted, Muhammad observed, and Muslims continue to this day? But why did the pagans do it? Why did the pagans do it? They did it in worship of the gods and goddesses, the 7 planetary deities. Thank you. So, folks, why in the world did Muhammad continue that practice, and why are Muslims running around the Kaaba 7 times and between the two hills 7 times, all of which even the Muslim sources admit were practices that the pagans observed because they believed in the sun and moon and 5 planets as god and goddesses that they had to worship and venerate. Why are the Muslims still doing it? You know what their excuse is? You want to hear their silly excuse? Do you want to hear what their silly excuse is? Oh, because Ishmael settled in Mecca and Abraham came and visited Ishmael, and Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba as the first house of worship. And so Ishmael taught them these practices, but as time went on, his descendants corrupted these practices and then attached them to gods and goddesses. So originally it was practices done for Yehovah, the worship of Jehovah. But then the descendants of Ishmael corrupted themselves, became idolaters, and then corrupted the practices and attached them to their gods and goddesses. Are you buying it? We're not buffering, Lisa. It's on your end. Are you buying that version of history? Does it make sense? And is it a coincidence that Ishmael told them, hey, run between the two hills 7 times, run around the Kaaba 7 times, and somehow, magically, 7 becomes the number of the gods and goddesses that the pagans worship because they thought there were 5 planets in the sun and the moon. Gee, what a coincidence. Let alone all the historical archaeological evidence refutes the claim that Ishmael went to Mecca. Because if you believe in your Bible, Genesis 21:21, it says Ishmael settled in the wilderness of Paran, and Paran is around Egypt, and Canaan, it's not in Mecca, and Genesis 21:21 says, okay, Genesis 21:21 says that Ishmael married an Egyptian because his mother Hagar was from Egypt, and she got him a wife from Egypt, so he never settled in Mecca, and he didn't marry an Arab woman and sired the Arabs in Mecca. That's Genesis 21:21, all right? You with me there? So at least we can know and confirm, and the Muslims agree this much the Muslims admit. The pagans were doing these things, running around the Kaaba 7 times and between 2 hills 7 times, and there was an idol on each side of the hill. And the pagans thought the sun and moon and the 5 planets were gods and goddesses. So at least the Muslims admit that much. Yeah, that's what they believe, and they did it for the gods and goddesses. That means everything else is nothing but fantasy, fairy tale, the Ishmael and the Abraham story. That is fantasy, fairy tale. But the Muslims are admitting that that other part of the story, that the pagans observed these practices long before Muhammad, and Muhammad was observing them, even when the house was steeped with 360 idols, that part they at least admit. Now, folks, let me add another thing as we get into the evidence. You remember what the source just stated? I just read Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He said to the Arabs, the moon, the Arabic word qammar, is masculine, denoting the fact that the Arabs viewed the moon as the male deity, meaning it was the planet, the astral object associated with the chief deity. And remember, the Arabs are what they call patriarchal society, meaning the male is the chief. So their god has to be male. He's the chief. The moon is the planet representing the chief male deity of their pantheon. You with me there? The sun is the female. Thank you, sister. God bless you. The sun is the female. The sun represents the female, the goddess, that's the wife of the male deity. Okay, now folks, the moon is the male deity, okay? Because it's the planet associated with the chief god of the pantheon, the chief god worshipped by the Arab pagans and a host of gods and goddesses. And the chief god is male. So the moon, Qamar, that's a masculine now. So it's associated with the male deity who's the chief. But hold on. The chief deity is supposed to be Allah. Follow with me. The chief deity is supposed to be Allah. He's the chief deity. He's the male deity. Well, if the moon was viewed as masculine, Qamar, and it's the male deity or the planet or the object associated with the male deity, that means you just established that for the pagans, Allah was the moon god. Oh my goodness. Dum diddy dum dum. Did you get it? If we take what the sources say, remember, I said sometimes the sources will just come out and say something black and white. Other times they don't say it, but it's the necessary logical conclusion and inference for what they are saying. You with me there? And the sources I'm going to quote will say Hubal was the chief god and Hubal was the moon god. No, TBL, it's a little more complicated. Don't get into the crescent moon, because they'll tell you the crescent moon is a symbol because they go by a lunar calendar, and the crescent moon and the 5 stars was actually not there when Islam initially began. It was the Ottomans that adopted that. So don't get too much in the crescent moon. Okay, just follow with me. Now what I'm going to show you, I'm not going to confirm what I just said. That if you read the sources carefully and connect the dots, then the necessary logical conclusion and inference from what they're saying is this. Allah was the name of Hubal. Hubal is the moon god, and Hubal is actually the idol Baal. And I'm not going to show it to you. Let's begin. Because right now, the sources, if you go to this article, point number 1, Hubal, Mecca's chief deity, the chief god of Mecca, the god of the Kaaba, the god of that shrine, the lord of that shrine in Mecca, the chief god of the pagans in Mecca was Hubal. This is what the sources say. So are you ready now? I'm going to be doing a lot of reading. I hope it doesn't bore you. Let me know, guys. Let me know if I'm going to text me first, last, or Protestant if I buffer. Okay, this comes from gods, goddesses, and mythology. Now, again, I don't think I'll have to give you all the information, but gods, goddesses, and mythology, volume 11, page 137. Hubal, chief god of the Kaaba, a martial and oracular, I can't even speak English, right? Let alone read. Oracular deity, a moon god. What was Hubal? A moon god. Oh my goodness. Who was the chief god of Mecca, of the Kaaba, of the shrine? Who was the chief god of the Kaaba, of Mecca? Hubal. And Hubal was the moon god. Are you seeing it? Okay, let's read another one. This comes from Cyril Glasse, and this comes from the New Encyclopedia of Islam. The New Encyclopedia of Islam, page 209. Hubal, an idol, the god of the moon. An idol, the god of the moon. What? An idol, the god of the moon? Here you go. It's right there in the article. Click on it. Let me read. Centuries before Islam, pay attention to this name. Centuries before Islam, Amr ibn Luhay, a chief of the tribe of Jurhum who dwelt in Mecca, before the coming of the Quraysh tribe, brought the idol to the city from Syria. Wow. We're going to revisit that, but let me finish it. It was set up in the Kaaba and became the principal idol of the pagan Meccans. Folks, understand the implication of what we just read? Hubal was an idol from Syria. An Arab named Amr ibn Luhay. Amr ibn Luhay brought the idol from Syria to Mecca, and Hubal became the chief god of Mecca. I don't think you understand the implication of it. The chief god in Syria among the pagans was Baal. Baal was the god that was worshipped by the Syrians before the time of Muhammad. If this Arab, Amr, brought the idol from Syria, what was he bringing to the Kaaba? The idol of Baal, before Muhammad. You want me to give you his social security as well? Whether it's a month before Muhammad, it doesn't matter. This is before Muhammad's time. Are you with me there? So he brought the idol Baal from Syria, and that's why it's called Hubal. Yes, Syria, from Syria, the Syrians. And notice Hubal became the chief god of the Kaaba of Mecca. So you understand what the sources just admit? Hubal is the god of the moon. He's the moon god. Hubal was the god of the Kaaba, the god of Mecca, the chief god. Hubal was the idol from Syria. These three facts are admitted explicitly by the sources. So now let's break it down. If Hubal is from Syria and the chief god worshipped in Syria is Baal, we just established Hubal is Baal. That means Baal was the chief god of Mecca, the chief god of the Kaaba, and Baal was then seen to be the moon god, the god of the moon. So who was the chief god of the Quraysh? Hubal. What tribe was Muhammad born from? Quraysh. So who was the chief god of Muhammad's family, of Muhammad's tribe, of Muhammad? Hubal. Who is Hubal? Baal. Muhammad was born in Baal worship. And this is Encyclopedia of Islam saying it. Did you understand what you just read? Encyclopedia of Islam. The chief god of the Quraysh was Hubal. Hubal was the god of the moon, an idol brought from Syria. Muhammad's tribe is Quraysh. He was born into the Quraysh tribe. That means Muhammad was born in a family that worshiped Baal.
Darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with.
Reason why you have to fight them is because they are Jews and Christians. You should fight those empires around you, or those hukumat around you, which are Jew or Christian, until they give the jizya. That's fine. That we already know Islam allows. And then the howness of that is in the hadith. The three options that they're given: either you give the jizya, or you do this, or you do that. We're not apologetic about that point. That is truth. Your religion has to have an expansionist element. So then, therefore, there is no situation or conceivability of peace being made between Muslims and non-Muslims. Islam is a warrior religion in many ways, and it's unapologetically so. It's about expansion, it's about conquest, and so.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. Darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with.
Reason why you have to fight them is because they are Jews and Christians. You should fight.
70 Christians, men, women, and even children were brutally beheaded in Kasanga, a village in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, you might be hearing about this for the very first time, and that right there is a huge part of the problem. If the victims had been another religious or minority group, you can bet that the headlines would be plastered everywhere. But because these were Christians, Congolese Christians, the world just seems to shrug. In this video, I'm going to show you how this tragedy unfolded alongside a dangerous theology that labels Christians as polytheists. And I'm going to ask the uncomfortable question, would the world care if they weren't Christians? Before we dive in, let me set the stage really quickly. So the Kasanga massacre occurred in the eastern part of the DRC. According to various reports, including the Wikipedia entry on the Kasanga massacre, an ISIS-affiliated group swept through a church, leaving behind a horror show of beheadings. 70 Christians, including women and children, were slaughtered. And this is not a scene from a movie. This is a reality on the ground in Central Africa. And yet, I have to ask the question, why is this not front page news? This probably is the first time you're hearing about this. In a recorded interview, Dexter Van Zyl, an expert on anti-Christian violence, put it pretty bluntly.
If you were to replace 70 Congolese Christian with any other minority group, 70 Palestinians were beheaded, 70 people at a pride parade were beheaded. This would be the biggest news story of the decade. And yet this just happened and no one's reporting on it. Literally crickets.
Right. And it's like that with Boko Haram when they murder people in Nigeria. There's basically crickets. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have essentially kind of an anti-Christian bias on the part of people who run the media. And the thing is that I think there's another factor is that essentially Christianity has been lumped in with essentially this whole notion of settler colonialism, and that whatever violence is directed their way is largely a consequence of the violence perpetrated by Christians in years past.
His words expose a stunning blind spot in global media coverage where outrage is selective and Christian victims are often overlooked. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a absolutely massive country that's been in constant turmoil for decades. Civil wars, regional conflicts, and foreign interventions have made DRC one of the most volatile places on earth. Groups like the Allied Democratic Forces, or ADF, which have pledged loyalty to ISIS, use terror tactics to gain control of strategic territories, especially mineral-rich areas. Quoting Dexter Van Zyl again, he points out,
the violence was perpetrated by an organization that was affiliated with ISIS. And the thing is that there are some people who have argued that they are essentially working on behalf of Rwanda, because Rwanda is a neighboring country that covets and is actually taking control of an awful lot of the mineral resources in Kivu.
Minerals in the DRC are crucial for the global tech industry, used in the devices that we actually hold in our hands every day. This messy interaction, though, of geopolitics, mineral exploitation, and jihadist ideology creates a sort of perfect storm where ordinary civilians, often Christians, become the first casualties. But why is the media so silent about this? Unfortunately, this is not new. We've seen it happen over and over, from Boko Haram's atrocities in Nigeria to extremist attacks on Christians in Sudan and beyond. Here's a shocking piece of insight from Dexter Van Zyl.
The thing is that unfortunately, this is the cynical side of me. I've been somebody that has documented hostility towards Israel for the past 20 years. But if the IDF were responsible for these beheadings, it would have made the front page of the Washington Post and the New York Times and every newspaper throughout the world. And there would be, Israeli Jews condemning it as well. But the problem is that because it's essentially black on black violence, nobody cares.
What's happening here is that there's a sort of narrative mismatch. The mainstream media often covers conflicts that align with certain political or cultural frames, but an attack on Black African Christians by Islamist militants That doesn't easily translate into neat Western headlines. And that's the tragedy here. If the victims don't fit a preferred story, the coverage is minimal at best. Now let's address something really important here, the religious driver behind attacks like this. And yes, this is a complicated geopolitical situation, but let's not pretend that there isn't a religious dimension to it. In the Islamic tradition, Surah 9:5, often referred to as the verse of the sword, says this: "Then when the sacred months have passed, kill the polytheists wherever you find them." That phrase, "kill the polytheists," has been used by extremist groups to justify violence against Christians, and it's very easy to see why. Dawah apologists like Muhammad Ajab and others will often label Christians as polytheists because of our Trinitarian belief. But if Christians are polytheists, and the Quran says to kill the polytheists wherever you find them, is it really any surprise when Christians are brutally killed by extremist Muslims? When such groups call Christians mushrikun, those who commit shirk or polytheism, they believe that they have a religious license to kill. And this is exactly the mindset behind so many attacks on Christians in Africa and the Middle East. They see it not just as like a territorial or political battle, but as a divine mandate. And that's why ignoring the Islamic angle misses a critical piece of the puzzle. But here is the gut-wrenching question we have to confront. Would the world care more if these victims were not Christians? Like if we replaced Congolese Christians with a group more favored by Western media narratives, global coverage would absolutely explode on this story. But why not for these believers? Well, because we're talking about Black African Christians in a remote conflict-ridden area. They don't have like a powerful lobby. They don't command the same international attention. So they're relegated to a media footnote, even in mass casualty attacks like this. And this is not just tragic, it's morally bankrupt. The question we have to ask is this: does every human life hold the same value or not? Are Christians in the Congo any less valuable than any other persecuted minority across the globe? When you see these images or hear these stories, families torn apart, churches desecrated, children beheaded, remember, these are real people, real souls with the same inherent worth as anyone else. Ignoring them simply because their plight doesn't fit a clean Western narrative is a blatant act of hypocrisy. Okay, extremist ideology explicitly targets Christians, labeling them as polytheists, citing religious verse to justify murdering them. 70 were beheaded in a church. 70. This is exactly what Dexter Van Zyl was warning us about, and it's exactly why we have to stand up and shout, yes, this matters. We can't let these voices go unheard. We can't pretend like it's just some over-there problem. This is a global problem. When religious extremists kill congregations and we barely hear a peep from the mainstream media, that just emboldens more violence. We have to spread awareness about this. We have to put pressure on our media, our governments, our churches, our communities to care about this story. Because if we don't, these attacks will continue in silence and continue to escalate. And they're going to be overshadowed by selective outrage. Thank you guys for watching, but
I'm just going to say quickly here that there is a story to be told about the Red Cross. I did a video on this a couple of years back, and it was, I believe it was, the channel was Guru. I'm not remembering his name, but it'll be in the description box, and he explains it very well and how it connects with the Knight Templars. So I was really surprised to hear how the Jewish see the Red Cross, you know, how they look at it as you know, as conquerors, or, you know, I'll put it in the description, but there's a lot to be said about this here, the Red Cross. And I believe his name is Malkovich or something like that, an artist. He was the one that did the Black Square. Okay, he also did the Red Cross. He did this also.
No, all that's gone. I think we need to move on. They took most of it, that's the point. We have to stop pretending that they don't.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe we could
Salazar, could we? That's good. Sweet Tree Salazar? I mean, that's the kind of choice that I would make. I enjoy it half the time, but I'm going out to eat somewhere, so... We might run out of time by the end of this. Alright, I'll leave it. Alright. The cinnamon rolls are gone too. No. All that's gone. I think we need to move on. They took most of it, that's the point. We have to stop pretending that they don't. Yeah, I agree. Maybe we could send Salazar, could we? That's good. Sweet Tree Salazar? I mean, that's the kind of choice that I would make. I enjoy it half the time, but I'm going out to eat somewhere, so... We might run out of time by the end of this. Alright, I'll leave it. Alright.
Okay, so I went a little deeper in this because I wanted to know who this, what's his name's, who this Salazar was. So I'm just going to read this and then I'm just going to end it. Okay, so it was in 2000, it was only in 2015, 41 years after the end of the dictatorship, that Portugal's first museum dedicated to coming to terms with the dictatorship with the museum was open. The Salazar dictatorship was 1932 to 1974, was based on the open party system, which used the secret police, PIDE, as central instrument of violence and oppression against the political opponents, strongly modeled on fascist Italy under Mussolini. The dictator Antonio de Oliveira Salazar introduced a new state, Estado Nova, which was supported by a coalition of the military, the Catholic Church, business enterprises, and large landowners. In addition, Portuguese colonies were ruthlessly exploited in order to fill the state coffers, which were also short of money. The regime worked systematically to depoliticalize and pacify the citizens through the 3 Fs of Portugal, and that would be Fatima, a Fubo, music, religion, and sorcerer. In 1974, through broad popular protest, finally ended the Salazar dictatorship. Sorry, my throat just... Yeah, so I thought that was interesting because, it reminded me a little bit of Canada, what Trump is doing here, trying to take over Canada, like a dictatorship. Okay, but I'll let you, if you want to go through that. Yeah, after hearing the young girl reading out the lip syncing here, it just kind of gave me a little bit of an impression of what, Salazar would be like a code word, and it was very similar to what we're watching President Trump do right now. And now concerning Canada, him wanting to having Canada to be the 51st state. So I just thought this was very interesting in their conversation between Obama and Biden. Okay, so it's interesting. It was only in 2015 they have to bring this up. I will be bringing this up quite a bit in my next couple of videos. Okay, the year 2015. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to read this out a little bit here. Okay, so this is talking about the prisoners. Okay, some former prisoners have described their experiences. I don't know how to pronounce it. The Tarrafal, the most notorious Portuguese concentration camp for revolting military officers, Republicans, communists, and other opposition figures. Later, prisoners came to include members of all anti-colonial independent movements in Angelo, I don't know, sorry, Cape Verde, I don't know, Guyana as well. The camp was built and operated along the lines of the camps run by the Nazi regime camp management. Senior officers and guards even visited German concentration camps on so-called training courses. Today, none of the perpetrators from this place has been convicted of their crime. In one part of the exhibition explaining how the dictatorship started, we see a photo of a large group of people giving the Nazi salute. Elizabeth says that during tours for school groups, she often shows this picture to the public, the pupils, and asks where they think it was taken. The answer she usually hears is Germany, but it was taken in Portugal. It shows how little children and young people in Portugal today learn about the Estado Nova. She also explains that the Portuguese schools, although the period of the dictatorship is addressed in the curriculum, the students hardly learn about the resistance and how the regime was overthrown in 1974. Okay, I'll just leave the rest up. I'll be putting this in the description. Well, here's a picture that I took here, and what I'm wanting to show in this picture, it was very clear that the thumb is bent. Okay, now whether Hitler had a broken thumb, I don't know, but here they're bent. Okay, this one here is bent, this one here is bent, this one's completely straight. Okay, so you can see they're purposely bent, or again, they could be all broken. Okay, and then I came across this, and I'll be finding the video for you. This is Mexico. This was, I believe, in 2024, or I think it was 2024 or 2025, but I'll get the video and put it in the description. But I had to take this. I mean, they all look like they're all doing the salute here. Okay. Yes, it's blurry because the picture itself is blurry. And I'm sure there's a reason for it, right? So I'm going to end it with this. Okay. I'm going to... Again, the two salutes here. Okay, now again, this is my opinion. This is what I'm seeing here. All right, so I'm going to play this out, and I believe that young Baron here is doing the Hitler salute, but he's not doing it with the arm. He's doing it with the arm bent, the second salute or first, whatever. Okay, so.
Hey, Baron, has anyone ever heard of him?
And there it is. Now, again, I'll put it in the description so you could see it. But the thumb is bent inwards towards the palm's out and behind his ear. She even notices it right here. Look. She points at it.
Thank you. He knew the youth vote. You know, we won the youth vote by 36 points. And then I have a very tall son named Baron. Has anyone ever heard of him?
Okay. Oh, that's right. Watch her gesture behind the ear. See?
Thank you.
Here's a closer shot of Hitler with the hand behind the ear kind of thing with his thumb. You can barely see his thumb, but his thumb is in. I mean, there are pictures. All you have to do is Google and look for it. You'll find it. Where, like, I don't know if it's a broken thumb or not. I don't. But I do know that it's a bent thumb in towards the palm facing out. So this is what I recognize to be one of Hitler's salutes. And again, we still have, in here we have the woman, which I was quite surprised, the same coat. And she's the one that gestures and is excited when Baron does the same gesture, the same salute.
He knew the youth vote. You know, we won the youth vote by 36 points. And then I have a very tall son named Baron. Has anyone ever heard of him?
And there she is right there. And then she's going to be so excited and show and gesture the ear.
Thank you.
Okay, so like I said, I'll find the video of this here, but I really believe it was in 2025 or 2024. I'm not quite sure. Can't read that. I think it's 2025. Okay, so I'll find this and put this in the description, the video itself that I took these pictures. Okay, so no fear, be love, and give hope. Thank you, Jesus.